welcome to what I've started calling the SMB WAG, but I'm not really sure whether I should. But it's a series of podcasts that's all focused on the SMB and its use of virtualization. We've done a whole series from an IT administrator, VDI based, even speaking to service providers in the SMB space who provide services to the SMB. With me today is John White. John, can you introduce yourself to people listening in and watching the video?
Absolutely. My name is John White, and I work for I would say a mid-sized distributor in the southwest of the United States, and we handle pet food. I don't know if that's really relevant, but yeah, I'm based in Southern California in Orange County, and it's very nice to be here today.
Great. Pet food and virtualization, I've heard it all. So, John, everybody has their virtualization journey. Yes, I'm sorry to use that word, the journey word. But can you fill us in how you sort of began with virtualization and sort of where is it taking you?
Absolutely. The first product that I ever used, I think my first exposure was to Workstation. But then the first product that I actually used in production was VMware's ACE, which was it was a Type 2, I think I think of it as an enhancement over player, where the guest was encrypted in an encrypted file, and you needed a password just to get into it. And I think that people used it, at least the way that we used it, was the way that people use VDI, like remote VDI now. So we could have a desktop that we pushed out remotely to another desktop. So that we could have a controlled environment with an operating system and application stack that was under our control and not the control of the end user.
So kind of pre-VDI solution. I like the idea of something that's pre-VDI. But it was a kind of early sort of a virtual desktop, but very much angled from a security perspective. But I guess I should explain how me and John sort of crossed paths. I did a blog post on Spiceworks a couple of months ago, and it was talking about disaster recovery, of which people who know me well know that I'm quite strongly associated with VMware's Site Recovery Manager product, having written some books about it. And John was one of the first people to sort of respond to that article, and there was a kind of a chat amongst the guys on the Spiceworks network all about virtual DR, and that's what made me want to get John on the show. So first real kind of techie question, I guess, is there's been recent announcements of vSphere 5.1, which has now got bundled into it vSphere Replication as part of the platform. So I wanted to know, John, is that something that is tempting to you, interesting to you, relevant to you, or is it a side feature to you and your organization?
No, I think it is something that's very intriguing. I think that, at least in my view, for an SMB, the very first thing that we need is on-site replication. And so for me, the idea of having, at least my infrastructure looks like I want to have one host that can handle all of my workloads. And a backup host would have everything replicated. And then my backup solution actually holds point-in-time backups, going, back in time, just in case it's something that got wiped out, but before the most recent replication. So in my mind, on-site replication is, kind of the first step before you go to shared storage and high availability. So I think for the SMB market, having that built-in replication is going to be, an enabling technology, and I'm really interested. Of course, there's products out there, that do it right now. Third parties like Veeam has a really good replication tool. So it's that balancing act. Does it make sense to use this tool or this tool? But I think replication, at least in my mind, is kind of a critical availability tool, and that doesn't even take into account disaster recovery, of course. So that on-site as that first step
Sure. I mean, the way I've been explaining it to customers is like, well, what VMware has done is virtualized replication. They've separated the replication process from where it would normally be, inverted commas, down at
Mhm.
the storage array and pushed that higher up the stack. So, I mean, for me, the big thing with that vSphere replication offers is the fact that it doesn't care whether your storage is local or whether it's iSCSI or whether it's NAS. You can replicate from unlike storage protocols, and I've started using it in my own lab to replicate data from one of my NetApp filers to one of my Dell EcoLogix units because I had a bit of free space on both, but obviously they didn't share a common protocol. So I've got a mix of array-based replication between two NetApps and a bit of array-based replication between two Dell EcoLogix. But I had quite a serious chunk of free space left over on two SATA-based arrays that I could use for vSphere replication, and I've kind of
Mm.
tiered it up as different types of storage. So
Right.
that would have been impossible or not really available without me going, like you just said, to the third-party market.
Well, I think that's an important point, at least in my mind. Like, the whole reason for me to use virtualization is to abstract off of the specific hardware. So anything that, VMware does that enables me to be independent of the hardware that I happen to be using, for one host, if it's, iSCSI, a storage appliance, it's a, NFS filer, that doesn't matter. If if I can get abstracted from that hardware for another host connected to completely different hardware, and it's in that hypervisor, level that's handling the service, then that's a win for me.
Mm. I mean, the other thing I was kind of intrigued with vSphere replication is the fact that it does do that kind of internal within a site replication. Because I must admit, from my kind of tunnel vision view, whenever I thought about vSphere replication or whenever I thought about replication and SRM, I was always thinking about different sites, New Jersey and New York or London and Reading or Paris or Rome. Maybe it's just because I like the idea of travelling around, but I thought it was very interesting that the first thing you flagged up was the replication internally to a site was your priority first. Whether
Right.
that exists in another site is a secondary concern for you?
Well, it's not secondary. It's just the low-hanging fruit,
Mm.
because I think a lot of people will look for, a backup solution, in order to provide high availability. But high availability to them is, what my site was, just a few moments ago, getting that back up,
Mm.
and using a backup solution to get, objects, or, be that file level objects or Exchange or SQL objects, or, whatever kind of, object inside. So getting, using a replication tool to provide availability. So it's really about, how often can I do that replication, of course, and that's a hardware issue, and it's a network infrastructure issue, and it's a host resource issue.
Or
So
what I sometimes call a physics issue, because there's only if you take a certain distance, the round trip time it takes for an electron to go down a length of cable and back again, that's of a finite value at the end of the day, and we haven't yet been able to go faster than the speed of light. So
no, we haven't.
I sometimes call it a physics issue. So I guess what we're trying to say, or another way of saying it, is that it isn't just about products. There's the processes, there's the business needs requirements out there. So maybe we should like not focus on a particular technology, but speak more generally about the general challenges of disaster recovery in an SMB environment. I mean, what kind of roadblocks or challenges do you need to overcome if you do want to do this kind of replication, either internally or into another site? What do you rub up against?
Well, I think that the main issue is that, I don't know if this depends on my environment, but I see this all the time, is management, without that that accounting training. So you're not talking about cost of downtime to a CFO. You're talking to an operations person who doesn't have a real strong idea of, if we're down for 10 minutes, how much money does that cost us? Because usually that number is not a whole lot. It's that hour of downtime, the second hour, the third hour, the whole first day, and sometimes even that in an SMB, it's, hey, we're going to be down for a day, send everybody home, get them off the clock. It doesn't necessarily cost a whole lot of money. There might be lost, opportunity costs, and those are, again, maybe difficult to measure for an SMB. So it's rubbing up against that inability to measure exactly how much money is being lost, and when you can't measure that, it's difficult to justify additional infrastructure, off-site hosting, bigger, bandwidth, more bandwidth, bigger pipes, to enable that off-site replication in some kind of reasonable time, and that's what I see as
what
the
I've
barrier.
sometimes done with people to try and bring the message home is I sometimes say, have you ever dialed into a call center and you've been speaking to somebody at the call center who goes, oh, I'm sorry, my computer's frozen or the network has gone down, and the 10 minutes I've been speaking to you, everything that I've been noting down has been lost, and we're going to have to do that all over again. How does that make you feel about the company that you're dealing with when you have that experience? You kind of
Right.
think, ugh, you know, and then times
Exactly.
that by, well, I rang and they were simply not available for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. So I try and make it into, have you ever had the experience of being affected by an outage as a customer? And what impression does that leave with you in the minds of do you want to go back to them and use them again? But I guess the other thing is that there are other challenges. We assume if you're doing a replication to another site that you have a site to replicate to, or
Absolutely.
even that
Right.
it's either far away enough or not too far away enough to be an appropriate target. Is that something you come across often?
Absolutely. And I think that, it comes, even without the technology of replication, people talk about, well, the very first step is to have, very, very good backup, that I'm writing to my tape drive and I'm taking it home every day. It's like, well, uh, how far away from the business do you live that, something like a flood wouldn't affect both the business and your home? So then you talk about real, backups and disaster recovery, even if it's with tape, involves, really giving it to a service that's taking it to a geographically diverse area and storing it in a way that, is fairly expensive, right?
Mm,
So when you measure that cost against the cost of having, renting space from someone's DC in a geographically diverse, place. Like I'm in Southern California. How far away do I need to go? Northern California? Well, if it's a large earthquake, it might affect both places. Las Vegas or, Arizona, maybe Chicago. So, having that gigabit connection, I don't know, 100 megabit connection, and the bandwidth to push out, my replication job on a in a reasonable amount of time without affecting other business.
sure.
That when you compare those costs, I think
I
that's
mean,
where.
I guess in the past, people who were in the SMB would have relied just on their backup as a way of restoring their data. And I guess you mentioned tape, but I imagine increasingly people are either backing up to the cloud or maybe backing up to disk-based storage, so it's a disk-to-disk restore. But I think
Right.
what often is forgotten is the quantity of data that we now have that factor that into your recovery time objective, the actual time to restore that data, putting aside, is it even off-site? The time to restores are getting longer because the quantity of data that we're keeping and archiving, either simply because there's so much data or because of logistical or legal reasons, we have to retain that
Right.
data longer than we used to. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is kind of why the my first step for recovery is a replication, right?
Mm.
So it takes a long time the first time, and then you're leveraging change block tracking to really have that that you know short replication time to make that replica site, even if that's on the site,
Mm.
um, a reality, and getting back up and running with the business. And when I think about offsite DR, at least in the SMB market, a lot of times it's about, getting financial data, available, as opposed to getting the entire business up and running.
It's not the whole organization that has to be restored, it's the critical parts. And I think sometimes the challenge is identifying what's a nice to have and what's an absolute must have in a DR
Absolutely.
plan. I used to say to a customer of mine whose only DR strategy was backup, I once asked him, how long did it take to restore this system? And he said, about 3 hours. And I said, so really it's about 6 hours? And he said, well, how have you managed to just double it? I said, well, the law of averages is that any restore that you'll do will get to 100% and then fail, and you'll have to start all over again. So you have to factor in that none of the things that we do are ever perfect, and sometimes you'll try a second restore or a second catalog, or maybe the thing that you're trying to restore wasn't in that particular backup catalog, it was in a different one. And not the right version. So
Right.
when you say it's going to take us this sort of time to restore, that kind of assumes that we live in the best of all possible worlds where these things work all the time. Why not factor in the fact that a certain percentage are just not going to work at all? What will you do then? And
Right.
that really did start to focus their minds when some of their restore times were being doubled or tripled based on how reliable their restore process is. Because with the best will in the world, nothing is perfect, is it?
No, it's absolutely true, and I think it really starts to drive home how important it is to test that backup. So with a virtualized environment, you have the ability, even if it's just manually, to spin up a backup, you know, or a replica, to a test environment, and change all the network numbers, or make it a read-only instance, or do whatever you need to do, or use a value-added product that'll automate all of those things for you, um, and and have that knowledge that, yes, this is a backup that actually works. Like, I can bring my environment back up, and it's sometimes it's, I have my Exchange server, well, I can't really test that without my, Active Directory server too. So I have to test those things in tandem, and having that process, that testing process, and having actually done it, on a regular basis, so you have faith in it, and know, approximately how much time it does take. I mean, I think that, sometimes the restore fails is a that's a terrifying thing to say to someone,
But it happens.
It does happen,
So
and especially if you don't test it, you don't know how often it does happen, right? So if you've gone through, a testing process where you've done test restores, once a week, twice a week, you at least have some internal stats, some internal feeling of how often this happens. Oh, we did do this restore. It took, only 30 minutes, but it was the wrong one, so we had to do another, 40-minute process this time, 15-minute process to go back in time to find the right version. And then, you know we so the entire process of restoring the correct environment, actually took 3 hours.
yeah. So it's been great. This time is going so quickly, but I'm already on to my last question, which is the question I've asked everybody in this series, which is, it's your right to reply if you like. What is it that VMware could do for you now to make your life, your virtual life, or your virtual world easier or more productive? Have you got two or three things that you would like to see VMware do for the SMB?
Well, I think that leveraging the partner network, I think, might help, especially for features like disaster recovery. So if I'm doing offsite, replication, for example, who are the partners that are ready to step in and help me out with space, or who have, validated processes to bring up, disaster recovery, or replication targets for the SMB market. I mean, that, as I say that out loud, I think to myself, wow, that's a great business. Just marketing. Somebody should do that, right?
Very entrepreneurial of you.
Yeah. So whoever's watching, at least get me in the test market, right? So yeah. So even having just created the product, now go ahead and create the marketplace to enable people to use that product because, SMBs aren't going to necessarily have, a pre-existing relationship with a co-location center, already have, $3,000 a month, invested in a rack in a data center somewhere. So all I need to do is spin up that space. Well, there's already a vCloud initiative, right? So it just seems to me that having, leveraging that marketplace of what is it? It's like 8,000 customers or something that are, already have v clouds up and running. Well, there needs to be, there I assume there is a subset of those companies that are willing to work with SMBs on replication targets and disaster recovery plans.
Sure. I mean,
Because
there
it's
are.
not just a product; it has to be an entire process.
I think there are a number of programs like that, like the vCloud Express, and of course, there's recently been launched the VMware Go Pro, which, if I recall, does have some sort of backup functionality in there. But I think perhaps there's more opportunity there for us to offer more in the way of either services directly or services through partners. And was there
Right.
anything else that was on your hit list of things that VMware could do for you?
Well, as an SMB, of course, I'm focused on the essentials kits, right? The essentials and essentials plus, and I see some products trickling down, especially 5.1, to have endpoint protection or I think operations manager like comes with the essentials plus now, or and seeing those tools, I think really gives me hope that that VMware has my best interests in mind. I think that having management of an environment is a critical part of about having actual infrastructure that works. Just having a two host cluster with guests running on it isn't a solution, right? That's infrastructure, and but you have to have management on top of that, and have visibility into what's going on in the environment. So wrapping all of that up into a package, and even if that package costs a little bit more than $600, is it for essentials right now? Well, the next step up is, I think, closer to $6,000 with Essentials Plus. So maybe like an intermediate step in there that has some management tools, beyond just having a vCenter server, but maybe like a trimmed down version of Operations Manager
Sure.
with capacity planning and those kinds of
Sure.
things.
Well, I'll have a chat with the CEO tomorrow, and I'll see what I can do for you.
John White said,
Well,
"Oh,
John,
John,
it's been great chatting with you. Thank you very much for sparing your time today, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
thanks for having me on."